Hey friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. I really hope you're all doing well. Today I have my January wrap up for you and it is quite the chunky one this month. So grab a cup of tea, grab a drink, you're gonna need it because I've got 15 books to talk through, which I think is possibly my best ever reading month ever. So I'm not gonna ramble, I'm just gonna go straight on into it. I'm gonna try and do these in order as well. Okay, so the first book I read in the month of January, and therefore the first book I read this year, is the 8th installment of Zodiac Academy, which is Sorrow and Starlight. This was a carryover from December. I did start this in December, but I started it kind of towards the end of the month. I feel like I may even have started it on New Year's Eve. And it is a really chunky book. This one is coming up on 1,000 pages. The typeface inside is really small, and I'm not gonna lie, this kind of put me in like a mini slump for a little bit. I did end up giving it 5 stars though, so like riddle me that, you know, a bit weird. But the reason it started to put me in a slump is just basically because this book is just chock full of filler, and I felt the same about book 7 as well. And I think when you read them all together, you know, the filler does become necessary. It is there for a reason, but it is also a lot to wade through. And I think if this was traditionally published, obviously I think an editor would probably edit out a huge chunk of this filler, but because it is just the author's self-publishing, they're obviously, you know, not kind of privy to that, and so therefore there's a lot of kind of POVs in this book and in the 7th book that are a little bit unnecessary. You know, you don't necessarily need to delve into every single person's perspective on the events in these 2 books. But that being said, there were several scenes in this book that just made it impossible for me to give it anything less than a 5 stars, based purely upon my emotional attachment to these characters. So I think with this series, this is one where when I rate it 5 stars and above, it is, well, not above, sorry, 4 stars and above 5 stars, it is purely because of the emotional attachment that I have to these characters and to the events that are happening in this book, rather than necessarily the quality of the writing. Because as well, it's not bad, and while Caroline Peckham and Susan Valenti can clearly tell a story, it's also not the best written thing in the world. It's very Wattpad-esque, and I think honestly that could be slightly insulting to some Wattpad writers as well. You know, you compare this to like Manacled, for example, which is just phenomenal, and it's not really even in the same ball game, but this is still one of my favourite series of all time. So it's a bit of a weird one for me to rate, really. I'm rating it on vibes more than anything else, but yeah, I loved it. When I got to the end of this book, I fully sobbed. I really cried. I think there's vlog footage actually from my first reading vlog of the year, and you see me just like losing it at this book. So yeah. Then I read The Dare by Harley LaRue, which is another one I gave 5 stars to. It was a really good start to the year when it came to quality of reads, because this is only a really diddy novella. I needed it as a little palate cleanser after reading Sorrow and Starlight. And this is just very spicy. This is just pure smut. It's literally, I think, maybe 200 pages, no, 138 pages of pure smut, and I love it. What I didn't realise was that she has now published Losers Part 1 and Part 2, which is the direct follow-on from The Dare. I'm actually reading Losers Part 1 right now and loving it just as much. I really enjoy these characters, I enjoy the dynamic. Harley LaRue's writing is just really good, because while she absolutely nails the smut, and it is smut, it's not even spice, it's smut, she can also write a really good plot, and she writes very believable characters, and I think that's really important. You know, our main character Jessica, she's not supposed to be likeable, she's supposed to be arrogant, she's supposed to be up herself, and I'm enjoying kind of the way that she navigates kind of learning about the other parts of her personality that she didn't realise were there, and kind of is moving away from the expectations set upon her by her family and by the environment that she grew up in. And I like the fact that, you know, they've got this really great group of guys who have kind of overcome their own obstacles and their own problems to be able to educate her on hers. I just think it's really well done. It's very interesting, and I definitely recommend The Dare if you're after something short and spicy, but just make sure you read the content and trigger warnings in this, because there are a few. It is very kinky, so yeah, definitely make sure you do your research before you pick this one up. Then I read Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, and I really liked this. So this was a 4-star read for me, and it is just a very low stakes fantasy novel, and it was quite nice and quite interesting to delve into something that was so low stakes for a change. And I will say it did take me a little while to get used to that. I think again in that same vlog I talk a little bit about getting used to reading something that isn't making you feel super anxious and super worried for the characters every 5 minutes. I really enjoyed that about this. I enjoyed the fact that I knew that nothing terrible was going to happen. I could just sink into the vibes of this book and just enjoy the world that is being built around me. And that was just, it was such a dream. And I actually read this with my best friend Joanne, and she loved it as well. So it was a really successful read, a very great start to the year, certainly. And I'll be picking up the next book that Travis does. I believe there is a follow-up to this coming out that's not necessarily like a direct sequel, but that is set in the same world and that follows the same kind of set of characters. So I'll be really, really interested to see what happens in this. But yeah, I loved it so much. It's just warm, cozy vibes, and it was perfect for the start of a very cold year so far in England. So I really enjoyed this. Not quite so successful now, we had All Your Perfects by Colleen Hoover, which is actually going to be my first book unhaul of the year. I really hated this book. I gave this 2 stars. I just found it really depressing, and I found the subject matter really triggering, even though I've never actually experienced it for myself, which was a very strange phenomenon for me, because usually I only get triggered by things that I have directly experienced. I don't know if it is the fact that Colleen is very good at weaving such a graphic and believable depiction of things that are going on, because her books are believable, they're very vivid. But I just found this one just too depressing, and I actually found myself waking up in the night whilst reading this and feeling heartbroken, and it was just a very strange thing because there was no reason for me to be feeling that way, and yet I was waking up and my chest was physically hurting, and I was feeling so deeply affected by this book. So this was just not it for me. I will not be really speaking about Colleen Hoover much more on this channel. I have 2 more books of hers left to read on my TBR pile, and I will read them because I've paid for them, but then that's it for me with Coho. I'm not a fan, and I really did not enjoy this book at all. It just felt gratuitous. It felt just too much trauma, and not done in a way that was meant to be kind of life affirming. You know, you read A Little Life, which is literally trauma porn, for want of a better phrase, and yet somehow there are still kernels of hope within it, and it makes you appreciate your life, and it makes you reflect on your life, and it's, you know, a beautiful depiction of friendship and love and overcoming crazy obstacles, whereas this was just trauma for the sake of trauma, and I really didn't like it. Then we moved on to another more successful book. This is one of my Christmas presents from Mama Love, and it was The High Mountain Court by A.K. Mulford. I really, really enjoyed this. Now, everyone says the second book is actually better than the first book, and if that's the case, I know I'm going to absolutely adore the second one. I can't wait to pick it up. I am kind of sad that the second one isn't going to follow the same characters. I didn't realise this was a series of interconnected standalones, and I would love to have seen more of Remy and Hale. I was really enjoying being in their POV. I was enjoying kind of watching their relationship develop, but that is not meant to be. So I am kind of excited to see obviously who the next book follows as well, because it's obviously hinted at the end of this one. I think it'll be a very interesting perspective. I did guess the twists in this very easily. I don't know if that's because you're kind of set up to be able to believe them easily, or if it's just because I've read a lot of fae fantasy romances in the past. I think it could maybe be a mixture of the two, but I did find myself kind of guessing a lot of them before they were revealed, but I don't feel like it necessarily detracted from the story. I don't feel like it was quite a 5-star read, but it was still very enjoyable. I still had a great time reading it, and so that's why it was a 4-star for me. It was also very, very fast-paced as well, and I do love a fast-paced fantasy. I like something that makes me just want to speed through it and not want to put it down, and that's what this did for me. So yeah, successful all around. Then we have possibly my favourite book of the month, and one that I think is going to stick with me forever, and that was As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Katal. This book just honestly was just heartbreaking, and at the same time so hopeful and so beautiful, and it just made me reflect on how lucky I am to live where I live, and to have grown up where I've grown up, and to have been born into the life I've been born into. So this book follows Salma, who is living in Homs during the Syrian civil war that's obviously been raging across the country now for the past 10 years. And this follows her navigating her new reality and having to come to terms with living under a dictatorship and what happens when revolution rises up. So she's gone to college and trained as a pharmacist, and has had to take on the role of a surgeon in the local hospital, which obviously she is not actually qualified for, but she has to because there's nobody else to do it. and she's then having to navigate the trauma of everything that she's seeing every day, and the amount of death and destruction, and, you know, the risk to her own safety that comes as part of treating the rebels in Syria. But during this really tumultuous and heartbreaking time, she still manages to find love, and it's this beautiful portrayal of an unfolding love story that's so innocent and so sweet amongst so much death and destruction. And it also talks a lot about displacement and, you know, the reality for the poor people who are having to leave these war-torn countries to find safety elsewhere, and the persecution that they face for having to do that. It was really, really heart-wrenching. It opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I do think this should be required reading for everybody. It also talks a lot about PTSD and trauma as well, with really vivid and important depictions of that, and I just think it's truly fantastic. I still haven't quite been able to process what I've read wholly with this one. I think it's one that will sit with me for a long time. It is certainly one that I think about on almost a daily basis. I was so emotionally, like deeply emotionally affected by this book. It was beautiful. And I think everyone should pick it up. It is technically YA, but to me, I think it works just as well for adults to read. And I think, to be honest, for older children as well, maybe having it read to them, or maybe if they're old enough and advanced enough within their reading to read it themselves. Obviously, it does heavily deal with subjects of grief and trauma and death, so, you know, that is something to bear in mind, but I found it fantastic, and yeah, it's one that will sit with me forever. I loved this book, and this was obviously 5 stars, like the easiest 5 stars I could give a book this month. Truly my favourite book. Just fantastic. At that point, I obviously needed another palette cleanser because that was very, very heavy, so I picked up The Ritual by Chantal Tessier, which is a book that I've been wanting to read for quite some time. This was kind of marketed as dark academia meets dark romance, which are 2 of my favourite genres, so I thought, hell yes. Sadly, it didn't deliver quite how I wanted it to, however, I probably will read the follow-up to this. I'm not sure what it's called at the moment, but the cover looks very, very similar. I gave this one 3 stars because, like I say, it wasn't bad, but it just wasn't great. It didn't kind of hit how I wanted it to hit. But I did enjoy the characters, and I did enjoy the writing. It's just the story itself didn't just kind of drag me in as much as I thought it was going to. But this is set at a very, very exclusive private school, and it follows kind of a secret society of very, very powerful individuals who are kind of born into this secret society and have to take girls in as, I guess, almost like their slaves. Very, very, very dark, very, very taboo. The spice is like next level. It is really, really good, and obviously everything within it is consensual. There is a huge list of trigger warnings though to read before you go into this, but if you do like dark and very spicy romances, then I do recommend picking this one up because you may like it. Like I say, it wasn't the best I've ever read, but it certainly wasn't the worst, and I did really, really enjoy it, so yeah. Then we had my other favourite book of the month, and this one, oh my god, it was so good. I'm desperate to reread it already, but I'm trying to wait because I want to reread the series as a whole as it currently stands, and that was Daisy Hates the Great Undoing by Jessa Hastings. I cannot tell you how much I love this series and how much I love this book. This book made me fall in love with Christian, and it made me fall in love with Julian. Like, I finally get the Julian hates obsession, and I am there. I am in it. Oh my god, I loved it so much. Some of the quotes in this book were just beautiful. Like, Jessa's writing is truly phenomenal. I loved it so much. I feel like I can't really give too much away in this one because obviously it's kind of the 2nd book in the Daisy Hate series and the 4th book in Magnolia Park's universe as a whole. But for anyone who doesn't know and who hasn't seen my previous videos discussing Magnolia Parks and Daisy Hate are 2 kind of like interlinking series of books that run along kind of chronological timelines, so you see the events in each book kind of happening from different perspectives between which series you're reading. So for example, if you read Magnolia Parks, you will see some of the same scenarios repeated in Daisy Hates from different points of view, but it's good because it's not kind of repetitive. It's giving you a more broader viewpoint of things that have happened and like a better understanding of what the characters are doing and their motivations. And Jess has kind of crafted this amazing friendship group, this like found family that feels so genuinely believable, that these people feel like my best friends, and I feel like I know them, and I feel like so intensely connected to them, and it's wonderful. It's basically like Gossip Girl if set in England, pure rich people problems, toxicity, problematic in terms of the relationships. It does deal with some heavy topics, but perhaps not in the most believable way. but I love it so much. I can't fault this series. There is not a single bad word I could possibly say about this series, so I'm going to stop going on about it now, but I am starting to consider doing maybe a separate video just talking about Magnolia Parks and Daisy Hates a little bit more eloquently and a little bit, and you know, kind of expand upon my thoughts and feelings on each of the books to try and convince you guys to read them, because I feel like if you love romance books, you need to pick these up. Like, you really, really need to pick these up. They are so good. A little bit different for me then, I read The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by Mariana Enrique, which is a collection of translated short stories all set in Buenos Aires, and this was interesting for want of a better word. So some of these books were really, really good, and some of these books fell very, very flat for me. I did expand upon this a little bit in a TikTok which I filmed. I didn't dislike it. What I do find about short story collections is quite often for me, like, there's maybe one story, usually the first one, that's really, really good, and then all of them afterwards kind of fall a little flat. With this one, the first one was really good. It did feel very kind of shocking for the sake of being shocking. It was quite graphic, it was quite gruesome, but I did enjoy it because these are primarily horror short stories and kind of compared to contemporary gothic fiction. It was the stories in the middle though that I tended to find more believable, more vivid, and also more shocking. There was one very, very good allegorical piece about fan culture which I just found incredible, because I think it just perfectly encapsulates the negative aspects of like extreme fandoms. It was very, very interesting. Some great social commentary in this, and I did really enjoy it. I gave it 3 stars because the rest of them did fall a little bit flat for me. Like, it wasn't a case of, you know, every short story being great or every short story being mediocre. But it was an interesting read. I definitely would recommend it if it sounds like something that you would like. If you like things that are shocking, gruesome, if you like body horror, that kind of thing, it was really good. And I love the cover for this book. I think it's absolutely beautiful. So this was really good. I did enjoy it. Sorry guys, if I look a little bit different, it is because my camera just decided it would be great to die on me, so I've had to switch to my vlogging camera. So the next book I read was actually my first ever Ana Huang, and I read King of Wrath, and I really, really enjoyed it. So this is a billionaire romance set in New York. It's set amongst kind of New York high society, so again you kind of have those Gossip Girl vibes, and it's super fast paced. I really, really enjoyed it. I loved Ana Huang's writing style. I love the fact as well that she made Dante like quite unproblematic as far as these billionaire romances go. I feel like over the years I've read a lot of these, and some of them can be really believable and really good, and other ones you just get these main characters that are just cruel for the sake of it, you know, and they're just kind of like lording it over the women because of their money, and they think that it means they can get away with kind of being objectively really awful people. And Dante wasn't like that. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with all of his actions, but I think the majority of them were done with Vivian's happiness in mind, and I mean, I respect that, you know. I also love the fact that Vivian is such a strong female character that like stood by her morals, and this really stood out to me because towards the end of the book, you know, something happens, as there is always kind of like some third act issue that needs to be resolved, and instead of just kind of like running back to him and jumping straight back into where they were, she really stands by her ground and is like, you know, standing up for what she believes in and standing up for what she wants. And I just found that really refreshing compared to a lot of the books where, you know, the girl goes back to the guy and everything's immediately forgiven and forgotten, and there's no kind of like repercussions or kind of, I guess, real life scenarios. I mean, if something like that happened to me, I wouldn't just go and run back to the guy. Like, I would, like, things would have to change. And I just really loved and respected the fact that that's how this book was written. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I will definitely be picking up the next one in this series. I think it's, I don't know what the series is called, something about sins, because I know it's based upon the 7 deadly sins. Kings of Sin. Okay, so yeah, King of Pride is coming out next, which I think is Kai's book, which I'm really excited about because I really liked Kai. So yeah, really, really loved this. Then I read How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. So this is Grady Hendrix's latest release, and oh my gosh, I love this. I gave this 5 stars. It was so good. It was so creepy. It was fast paced. It was emotionally traumatic, as you will see from my next reading vlog, which I read this book in. It had me crying, it had me laughing, it had me cringing, it made me happy, it made me feel intense grief. It scared the hell out of me, which I've been wanting from a book for ages, and this really, really, really kind of like hit that creep factor so well. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I really love Grady Hendrix. He has such like a a way of offsetting scariness as well with great snark and sarcasm and humor, and I love that about his books so much. And that kind of trademark snark was very, very, very apparent in this one. It was wonderful. And there were some chapters as well that were just so vivid and so well written, and they just really stood out to me. I quoted them in the reading vlog that is coming up on my channel that you will see probably the next video to be released after this one. It was just fantastic. Like, I loved every single second of it, so definitely recommend picking this one up. I think it was refreshing as well because it's been a little while since I've read kind of a thriller or a horror since I binged them in October, so it was very refreshing to read something like this again, and especially one that actually did the job and both thrilled and horrified me. 10/10 for Grady Hendrix, 5 stars all round. Loved this. And then the last of the physical books that I read was Revelry by Candy Steiner, which is a small town romance, and I actually found myself enjoying this so much more than I expected. I don't know why, but I've been putting this off, putting off picking it up off my shelves for months now, and I think part of it is because I read A Love Letter to Whiskey the year before last and I loved it, and it was just a very emotional read for me, and I found it I found it incredible. And then I read the first of the Becker brothers books last year called On the Rocks, and I just found it really fell flat for me in comparison to A Love Letter to Whiskey. So I was nervous to pick up more of her work because I want that same feeling that A Love Letter to Whiskey gave me. And while this didn't quite have that, it wasn't far off. This was really, really good. I gave it 4 stars because, like I said, it wasn't quite like that 5-star vibe for me. But I really believed in the characters. I really believed in their stories. And I also really loved the side characters that we meet in this book as well. Mama Vaughn in particular had so many incredible words of wisdom to give to our characters. And I felt that they came as like a great comfort to me when I was reading it as well, which was just really nice. There's so many passages in this book that I highlighted like crazy, and I just really, really enjoyed reading it. So I definitely recommend this one. Like I say, it's just a cute, wholesome, small town romance set in a cabin between a fashion designer and the guy that she falls in love with for the summer, or is it more? Who knows? And then finally, I read 3 books on my Kindle this month, the first of which was Spare by Prince Harry. I feel like everybody read Spare this month. I mean, can you blame them though? It's been everywhere. I had such bad FOMO and I knew I had to pick it up because I'm one of these people that if I'm going to have an opinion on something, and if I want to be able to talk about something, especially something that is like a hot trending topic, I want to be educated about it. I want to have read what I need to read. I want to understand the topic in full. So I didn't feel like I could speak about Harry and Meghan and everything else without reading this and, you know, watching the Netflix documentaries, and obviously I saw the Oprah interview and everything else. And I gave it 3 stars. It was, or did I give it 3.5? I think I gave it 3.5. It was better than I thought it would be, honestly. I do think he had some help with a ghostwriter, but there's nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of people do when they're doing autobiographies. I can't say I agree with the way the press have framed him and this book. To me, it didn't read like he was attacking the royal family in any way. It didn't read like he was being poor little me. I don't agree with the excerpts that the press have decided to extract from the book and run with. For example, the mention of how he lost his virginity, I think, has been blown out of proportion in the press, when in reality it was one tiny little sentence in the book, and taken out of context and discussed in that way has made it into more than it was. I think the same can be said for the comment made about the Taliban as well, because again, within the wider context of that chapter, that sentence and those phrases were used in quite a respectful way, but once again taken out of context and removed from the chapter, they were made to sound different, you know. I think it's unfair the amount of flack that he's come under, and I feel very, very sorry for him and for Meghan, and honestly to Will and Kate as well, for what they're dealing with the press in the UK. The press aren't very nice over here. I mean, I can't speak for whether they're like that in other countries because I haven't lived in other countries, but here certainly the press are awful, and I fully sympathise with them because it must be terrible to live your life under a microscope with every single action that you're taking being examined and spoken about by hundreds of millions of people all over the world. Like, it just, to me, that seems vastly unfair when you can't help what family you're born into. And I'm not saying he isn't intensely privileged, of course he is, but equally nobody deserves that level of scrutiny, especially when it's something they haven't actively chosen. You know, if he was like a movie star who had actively chosen to become famous and was then complaining about press, I would feel a little bit more sorry for him. But as it is, he couldn't control being born into the UK royalty. Like, of course he couldn't. No more than I can control who my parents were, or you could control who yours are. So I think kind of penalising him for not wanting to be hounded by the press any longer, when the press were directly responsible for the death of his mother and for basically all of the awful things that have happened to him, I fully sympathise with him for that. And I think it's interesting, you know, the bits in this book that have kind of proven the press's involvement and where those tips have come from. Very, very interesting. So as you can probably tell, I am definitely team Harry and Meghan, more so from reading that. Do I think they probably need to lay low now and be quiet? Yes. I feel like they've kind of said what needs to be said, and now is the time to kind of follow through on that. Okay, we're leaving the royal family, we don't want a part of this anymore. I'm like, okay, you've said your piece, let's just let it lie. But I'm glad I read it. So I then read The Six Deaths of the Saint by Alex E. Harrow, because I was getting really bad FOMO that basically every person on book Twitter was reading this book, and I gave that 4 stars. That was one of the Amazon original short stories, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very, very interesting, and it's made me want to pick up the other books in that kind of short story series to see if they are as good, because there are a lot of, you know, big name authors that have contributed towards it, and I found it incredible. So this book was effectively a depiction of the Saint of Death, or War, is it War? Is it Death? I can't remember. Who comes to this little girl who is very poor and living in extreme poverty. She's very sick, and this saint comes to her and basically starts guiding her towards a better future. She goes and works with this prince, and this saint is always in her ear, basically helping her win all these battles with this prince, which, you know, rises her up the ranks and helps her become something amazing. And then towards the end of the war, end of the current conflict, she goes to visit the prince and he drowns her, and then she comes back to life again with the saint, and she can make kind of different choices every single time she comes back to life, so it's almost being stuck in a loop. Very, very interesting premise. I don't want to give too much of it away because, like I say, it's a short story, so I feel like if I give too much of the plot away, I'm just going to basically tell you the whole thing without reading it. But all I would say is I definitely recommend it. It's very fantasy-esque. It's got very believable world building. I love how it goes from initial concepts, like, right the way through to completion. I know that sounds like such a weird way of explaining it, but it was so good. So I definitely recommend picking that up if you've heard whisperings about it on your timeline but haven't done yet, because it was truly, I think, my favourite short story I've ever read, to be honest. I really loved it. And then finally I read Seekers We Hunt by Dana Eiley, and I gave that 3 stars, which was just a very, very spicy little novella. It was fine, it just wasn't anything special. It was just pure smut for the sake of pure smut, really. And it's within like a series of smaller novellas, and each one follows a different guy, and it's basically just like one night, so obviously you can't delve too deeply into relationships between the characters, world building, anything believable. It is purely just about them like meeting and having sex, basically. I didn't hate it, it just wasn't great. I wanted to clear off some of the bits that I have on my Kindle right now, so that was just one of them, and I thought, why not? And I'm actually going to talk to you about one book that I did finish this month, but I might as well, because I'm on the topic of wrapping up what I read recently, and I read The Chain by Adrian McKinty. I started that at the end of January and finished it yesterday, and it was honestly one of the worst thrillers I think I've ever read. I gave it 2 stars, and the premise of it was very, very interesting, and I really enjoyed the premise, and I thought it was going to be really good, and I've seen so much hype for this book, and it just didn't deliver. Basically, it was trying to do way too much with the writing. But the plot of the book effectively follows a woman called Rachel who's just recovered from breast cancer. She's got a daughter called Kylie who's 13. She's divorced, but she's got a good relationship with her ex, and one day Kylie goes missing. On the way to school, she gets kidnapped by 2 people holding a gun, who then contact Rachel and effectively hold Kylie to ransom until she pays a certain amount of money, and until she kidnaps a child in return. It turns out these kidnappers' child also got kidnapped, and they're part of the Chain, which is like a high-level kidnapping ring working in North America. And once your child has been kidnapped, you have X amount of time to send over a ransom in the form of Bitcoin and to kidnap another child, and then once that child's parents have paid the ransom and kidnapped another child, your child is released, and so the chain continues. So the first half of the book is about getting Kylie back, and then the second half of the book is about Rachel then trying to take down the Chain. I first of all guessed who was responsible for the Chain within about 30 seconds of their character getting introduced. I did not find it very difficult to guess. I found it very, very simple, actually. which was a shame because I feel like if I hadn't guessed it, that plot point would have really got me. But alas, it was just far too obvious. The second issue that I had was with the writing. I feel like it was just all over the place. There were some chapters that were written in such like a lyrical fashion that were using really heavy metaphors, and the writing would have been good in a different context and if it was consistent the whole way through. But because some chapters were like that and then some chapters almost read like Wattpad fiction, it just felt very jarring going from one to the other, and you'd literally finish a chapter and then be met with this like lyrical exposition on setting and be like, what on earth am I reading? Like, it was very difficult to kind of get through, and I really disliked it. I mean, I didn't, dislike's not even the word, I strongly hated the book, so I gave it 2 stars. Not for me. Amazing premise, but just terrible execution. And that is all the books that I read in January. I really hope you've liked the video. It was a very good reading month. I don't know if I can do this every month, but this month was a good one because it was just a lot slower with work. I actually had time. I was able to just relax into reading and just enjoy it, which was really, really fun. February is just all about romance. I'm in the month of love, so yeah, I'm going heavy on the romance this month. So if you're wanting some amazing spicy romance book recommendations, wait until my wrap up because I will be giving you so many. I have so many books that I'm excited about that have been on my TBR for a long time that I'm going to be reading this month, and I'm so here for it. But anyway, that's it for this video. I will see you in another one very soon. Thank you so much for watching. Bye, friends.